Awesome. Hold on. What? Now we're trying that again. If you can hear me, raise your hand. Little bit closer. All right. Round 3. You can hear me, raise your hand. Awesome. All right. I think this is loud enough. Soon we're going to begin. A vigil is a time when people come to... A little louder? All right. Hold on. How about now? So a vigil is a time when people come together to be community, to affirm that we are all one. We all are children of the same Creator. So we're here at this vigil, which is this time of affirming our relationship. On this table here, there are masks, if you would like them, and hand sanitizer. There is also candles. As you feel moved during this time, take a candle and you can say a private prayer and leave it among our sign of our community mourning. You can do this whenever you feel so moved. There is also a flyer that I would like you to take with you at some time during the night. In it is different resources, because this can't be our only time meeting. This should be one step of many steps of us walking together and being a community working towards a wholeness for us all. We are having minor problems with the internet, so we're going to try to get this working here, but it might be that this is uploaded later tonight for those who wish to be with us but are not here physically due to other commitments or COVID. A few more housekeeping. Behind me up the path is restrooms. Feel free to use them whenever you would like. And I think that's all of my housekeeping things. So I wanted to tell you, I am Whitney Bruno. I'm the new pastor here at this church, which is the United Church of Little Current and Shaguenda. Every Sunday, we get together and we as a community acknowledge that this land here sits on Treaty 94. And we acknowledge every Sunday that this is locally the traditional lands of the Whitefish River, Ondek Amikani, and the Shaguenda First Nations. Every Sunday, we name the Ojibwe, the Ottawa, and the Potawatomi. We name all of these First Nations as the stewards of this land and ourselves as guests here. Acknowledging this is a step of acknowledging ourselves as part of one community. Tonight, we're acknowledging that this one community is hurting. We are aware of the children that were lost in Kamutz. We are aware of how many more children were lost and are not yet counted. We're aware of the children in our own community that haven't come home. So we're here. We're mourning. We're in anger. We are frustrated. We know there cannot be any healing at all as long as this pain goes unaddressed, and as long as our systems, the way our government runs, the way our culture runs, continues to harm people in our community. So this vigil here is to acknowledge all that and to give you a space to speak if you so wish. We're here to listen. I am a pastor, so before I begin, I would like to pray that we are given the strength to bring forth the future that we are dreaming of, present now. I pray. Creator God, to each of us, you've given us the power to dream. We dream of a present when colonial and racist attitudes are extinguished. We dream of a present when no one is comfortable and complicit with unjust systems. We dream of a present when every child is given a stable home, with a loving family, and with all the resources they need to grow and flourish, to find meaning and purpose, and to pass that love on to others. We dream of a present when Earth's resources and spiritual resources are generously shared. Creator God, to each of us you've given the power to turn dreams into reality. May we make this dream present today. Amen. This microphone is open for any that wish to speak. And if you don't wish to, it's okay. You're here being community. Speak with one another. We are one. Can you help me pass out some of the flyers?
Good afternoon. Good evening. My name is Patsy Corbier. I'm the Chief of Ondick-Dominiconing First Nation. I'd like to say miigwech to the pastor for recognizing our traditional territory. Residential school, what happened in Kamloops is unimaginable. Having 215 children that are missing, never brought home to be properly buried, is a tragedy. And the trauma that First Nations have had over the years, including all residential schools, and what they did to even the survivors that lived from those schools, have had long, dramatic lives of alcoholism. A lot of things have happened to them. And over the years, people didn't really understand that. Even First Nation people didn't understand what those survivors went through. And when you look at it through the years, they were ridiculed. They were ridiculed by their own band members for their addictions and things that went on with them, their mental health. And that's a tragedy in itself, because they never had a happy life. When you look at kids today that weren't, and
so many people that are unaccounted for, and I guess we were just in the way. And what I found really interesting with that black man said was he had Native Americans in the audience there on one of his videos, and he said, you know, you people are lucky. You still got your language. You know where you came from. You know who you are. We got nothing, he says. You people, he says, anybody here, and he's talking to an old black audience, and he says, can any of you, do you know what your language is? What's your language? It's English. Well, you're not English. You know, at least these Native people got something. We got nothing. But he's such a dynamic speaker that he's waking up all, you know, he organized a 1 million man march, I forget how many years ago, 25 years ago. and he was talking about black men, and over 2 million showed up there. They made a statement to Washington, and I guess that really scared the government, because now they're shooting those guys in the street over there. You know, one guy got shot for stealing a chocolate bar. So I thank all of you for listening to me. I don't know if I make any sense or not, but it's you know, it feels good to see this, that people are starting to recognize that why our people are the way we are, because of what went on over in those schools. You know, one lady I watched when this residential school stuff first started coming out 20 years or so ago, and she was going through this museum. I think it might have been British Columbia. And so this lady that was taking her around, a non-native lady, asked her, "What did you learn over there?" "I learned 2 things," she said: "to hate and to steal." She started to cry. She couldn't talk anymore. And that's about it, because I see some of my own family, and others, you know, close relatives. It's really, really, really nasty, some of the things that they do to other people. And those are the ones that went over there and got tortured and abused. And in this book, a cousin of mine here from AOK was telling me the same thing, but I see it written in this book that I loaned to this young lady. And I guess what they used to do with the older native boys, they're the ones that gave out the punishment. If you got caught talking your language, you're told you go downstairs to the basement. They knew right away when the priest or preacher or whoever the school teacher was said you go downstairs. So the bigger boys would go down there and strap, and they would get whacked in the bare bum. They'd have to pull their pants down, and they'd be bleeding by the time they finished. So these poor older boys, if they didn't get that punishment, they in turn got that. So it became a lot of hate to these, you know, native against native. After I knew this cousin of mine in AOK was telling me, and he mentioned this guy's name who was from our reserve. But he didn't come back home. He moved out to British Columbia. And he was telling me about that. And he says, you know, I couldn't speak a word. I was 5 years old. And this guy, every time I would open my mouth and somebody asked me a question, I'd answer their language. Okay, downstairs. So we knew after 2 or 3 trips, you pull your pants down, you stand there naked. The big boy comes there with a strap and beats you up. And he said, you know, Norman, if I met that guy, I wouldn't care how many witnesses. I'd kill him right here, right now. Excuse me. That's how much pain he went through. That he remembers it. And there was another guy from the Comic-Con told me pretty much a similar thing, but I talked him out of it. He was going to kill another guy there from Comic-Con. I talked to him, but it's quite a few years ago now. Anyway, thank you. And I sure hope there's just not a one thing. When I first saw the picture the other day, I was thinking to myself, but I think I might have mentioned it to one person, that I hope it's just not a photo op, that we can continue moving on and try and heal.
Yes.
There's a lot of pain up there.
Yes.
Can all hear me? That's good. I came here and started my teaching career, and they were down in front of the Edgewater. It's a busload of children, and the driver went in to get a coffee. And I wondered, what the hell was going on? And somebody, Barbara Cranston, I think, told me it's a busload of kids. They're going to Spanish, and they're going to be there the year. I said, what? They left to leave their family? It can't be. And I started to advertise in my build up to that. And I said, when I went to the school, there was all schools all over the place, schools all over, and it's a private school and so on with all of them.
You just tilt it towards you.
Okay.
There you go. Perfect.
So I talked the Board of Education into building one big school. I went out and I got to talk to all of the residents around, and they came to the school, and that included the native kids. And they came to the school, and they were there for a while. Yvonne Nagabo from Sucker Creek, or AOK, took the leading we presented honors, and she had the honors for the best student in the school. She had the top access. And I haven't seen anybody around here in that same position where they're not looked at with an equal basis. I think every child learns, and every child learns together. And this is what this is about. We're going out there celebrating the deaths of 215, but we got to keep backing and keep doing it, and so we will have the same kind of thing which they have. We have sacred promises. I go down the street and I talk to the native kids, and they're not native kids anymore. They're older people, but they accept it, and I accept it. This is what we should be. We should be equal. Every child matters, and we educate them all the same, and we treat them all the same. If one kid got in trouble with me and it's come in the office with me, I give him hell. If it was a native kid, I give him hell. If it was a white kid, I give them hell. If they were good students, I praise them, native and otherwise. And this is the way we've operated. And we haven't had any complaints, or shouldn't up till 26 years ago, any complaints that any people were against us using the school, one school, for all the kids. And we all figured out that we had the numbers. And a lot of the kids have gone from the public school to the secondary school and to the colleges and the universities, and they're graduating. You can go back and see. There's just as many native kids going on as there are white kids or any around. And this is what we would always have to do. We have to live that every child matters. And this business out in Alberta, or the Kamloops rather, we just don't understand it. And they went to Spanish and we got rid of that and brought all of it together. So I thank you, and maybe every child matters in the school. Bye. I don't speak very well anymore. I've had 2 strokes and it figures me out.
I'm very nervous. I'm not a public speaker. I wasn't going to speak, but this gentleman kind of prompted me and brought some thoughts. It doesn't matter how much we say that every child should be educated the same. If you go to northern communities, they don't have schools for their children. They have to send them to North Bay. And parents send their children to high school. The first day is supposed to be really exciting and a really happy day. And in those communities, the parents send their children and they don't know if they will come back. And so, yes, I agree, every child should be educated the same, but we are a long way from that. And as far as residential schools, I'm a settler. I'm a white settler. I learned about the Indigenous history of Canada about 5 years ago, and I was just outraged. I just could not believe it. And so residential schools, some people, I've heard a lot of people comment, particularly on social media, well, they got an education. But that is not the point. The point is these children were taken away against their will. They were taken and ripped away from their communities, from their families, their aunties, their grandmothers. That's what we need to remember. And so when someone tells you and talks to you about education, please let them know. There's lots of resources out there. Each and every one of you can get an education. I need to see.
everyone hear me?
You have to tilt it toward yourself a little bit. Yep.
This better? Everyone hear me?
Perfect.
All right. My name is Garrett, and I've been learning a lot about the history of just the Indigenous people, just First Nation people. I've learned just in school we're taught that Canada's a lovely place, but in reality, it has a lot of flaws. Even before the residential schools, First Nations people were mistreated. They were put into camps or lied to about treaties. And in the residential schools, 215 dead children's bodies were found. And that's just one of the many, many residential schools in Ontario, not even just across Canada, solely Ontario. Okay, sorry, I'm losing my train of thought. I tried to plan this out, but didn't work. Just spread the word. We can help one at a time. Spread the word on Facebook, Twitter, anything. Just talk to people. Spread the word. Anything you can do to help, do it. The government will only fix this if we, as a community, if we force their hands. We can't wait for them to do it themselves. Thank you for listening.
Yeah, I forgot to mention, has anybody seen the video called Indian Horse? Yeah, anybody that didn't see it, if you want to learn more about the brutal history, it's a real eye-opener. It's pretty painful, but that's a lot of truth in there, what really happened. Miigwech.
Hello, are you able to hear me back there? I apologize, I'm not really good with public speaking either, and I may or may not get a little emotional. I was getting emotional listening to everybody speaking here today. I just wanted to touch base a little bit and say thank you for this opportunity to come together as a community with so many First Nations that live and reside here on Manitoulin Island, to see all of the Indigenous and non-Indigenous communities come together is what it's all about. If children as young as 3 years old were able to be taken away from their families and taught an education, then now is the time to say that the children 3 years old now, today, can learn about our history, the real history of Canada and what Canada is built on. And unfortunately, Canada has been built on many lies and many mistrusts within the Indigenous and non-Indigenous communities. Back when I was in high school, I was in grade 11 taking an Aboriginal course that I had to take in order to continue with my education. And I chose at that time to learn about the residential schools. And the reason I chose that is because I had heard briefly that my mother had attended residential school. But my mom never really talked too much about it. She stayed pretty quiet. And I remember her stating a few times to us, and like my dad had mentioned in the last couple of years before her passing, she apologized to me. And she apologized for not sharing our language. She apologized for not teaching me my language that I had every right to know. Because in the 8 years that she attended the residential school, she was taught that our language was the language of the devil, and that if we spoke our language, that we were less than human, that we were savages. So she never spoke that language for many years within our home. I'm the youngest of 6 children that my mom and dad raised, and it wasn't until I was in grade 11 that I understood and learned about residential schools, because it was never taught when I was in school. I never knew that children were being taken away from their families. It was never in my history books. In my history books, I learned about Christopher Columbus coming to Canada and finding these uncivilized people. And I remember going home thinking, am I? Am I uncivilized? Am I a savage? And I wanted to learn more. So as I was kind of going in and learning a little more about these residential schools, I learned about John A. Macdonald. I learned about how the first residential school was in Ontario, in Brantford. And it was based from what John A. Macdonald had been seeing in the States, and how they were taking Black people away from their communities, from their families, and sending them away to boarding school so that they can learn the English language. So it didn't just start with the Indigenous communities. It didn't just start with Native children being taken away. It started in the United States with Black children being taken away from their families. So anyone that was of color was considered to be uncivilized, and that we were told that we needed an education. So as I was learning about this, I started to interview some of the other community members within my own community. I come from Shegwenda, and spoke with some of the elders there that had attended residential school, some of which attended school with my mother in Spanish, and also some had went to Shima, which was closer to Sault Ste. Marie. I wish I could say that I still had those tapes, but unfortunately, after listening to them too many times and sharing it too many times, the tape got chewed. For your young ones, I know I sound like a dinosaur using tapes, but you know, and I really hang on to those stories that were shared with me, and the pain and the unimaginable torture that my family went through. And when I heard about the 215 children in Kamloops, it hurt my heart because it hit so close to home. Because I remember the stories of my mother talking about how I have an uncle buried at Spanish in an unmarked grave, that he didn't get to go home. We didn't get, and sorry, my grandmother didn't know that my uncle had passed there, because like John Harder had spoken about the boats that would come in and the wagons that would come in to grab the children and take them home for the summer, that they were allowed to go home and reside with their families for the summer for a couple of months and then be taken back again. So in that time that had passed, my uncle had already been gone and buried at this school. So when the boat arrived and all of my mom and my aunts and my uncles, you know, are coming off of this boat, my uncle wasn't there, and they were never told why. They were never told that my uncle had passed there. And it wasn't until years later that we found out that, you know, the truth of what happened then. Not something that I'll share. I'll just share that he did pass there. It's a pretty traumatic story. But listening and talking with the different community members that had attended school and listening to their pain, and it gave me a little bit more of a better understanding of why my mom chose not to speak the language and why she chose not to share the language with us. And I can say I can say this, and not just because she was my mother. My mom drove the school bus for the Little Current Public School for over 30 years, and she drove 3 generations of children to the school. And I wondered why. Why did you do that, Mom? Why did you choose to become a bus driver and to take these children to and from school every day? And her response was, I knew how many children got on my bus in the morning, and I knew that I was going to have the exact same amount of children on my bus after school, and I knew that I was dropping these children off home to their families at the end of the night. That's why she put up with us for 30 years not listening to her on the school bus. And one of the lessons that I'd like to share with you that she shared with me is even through those 8 years that she attended this school, she never learned how to read and write. It was self-taught. She learned how to survive. She learned how to be strong. When she first went there, she didn't know her name. And all children were given the clothing that they had to wear, and that was theirs. And in the inner tag of her dress was a number. And from the moment that she had walked into the school and was bathed and her hair was cut and all of that, from that point on, she was known as number 7. So many people say number 7 is, lucky number 7. That's not a lucky number for me. Number 7 represented my mother for 8 years in this school. And at Spanish, they had a girls' school and a boys' school. So imagine attending a school and looking over, not far in the distance, and seeing your brothers standing there and being in trouble because you're not allowed to speak to them. They would attend church services on Sundays when the boys' school and the girls' school were able to come together. But if they tried to speak to each other, they were punished. And some of those punishments were pretty harsh if they were found speaking to their loved ones. So not only were they taken away from their moms and dads, they were taken away from each other and going through the same pain together, but separate all at the same time. But my mom was one of the most humble people I knew. And I think that some of you that do know my mom can say that that's true. That she was very humble, she was very kind. And she would bring in, I remember when I was a kid, one year there was 23 children living at my mom and dad's. Because my mom never turned a child away, never. If a child needed help, she was there. She would do anything to ensure that those children had food and a safe place to lay their head at night, where she knew that they were going to be safe and that they weren't going to be abused. And like I said, she was kind and she was humble. And when she spoke of her experiences at the residential schools, she didn't speak with anger. She didn't speak with hatred. She just spoke point blank that this is what happened, and I spent 8 years of my life in this school, and I learned how to cook, I learned how to sew, I learned how to be resilient. And that's the key word, was that she was resilient through all of that. And she told me, I don't blame the religion. And that's what I want to share with what she shared with me. Do not blame that religion. Do not blame the white man. Do not blame the priests. Do not blame the churches. Because those churches, those people are not the ones that hurt me. Those are not the ones that came into my home and dragged me away from my mother. I can blame the Indian agent that came and took me away from my mom. I can blame the sisters and the nuns that would beat me for speaking my language. I can blame the priests that hurt me in these schools. She taught me that we are all the same, like you had said, and we are, and that we need to treat everybody the same. Because I don't know about you, but the last time I checked, I wasn't God. I wasn't creator. I don't have that right to judge. I don't have that right to criticize what I don't know, what I never experienced. I can understand and try to understand from the stories that were shared with me when speaking with some of the different community members that have attended school. But unless we've lived it, we're never going to understand. And I'm just really grateful to see so many faces here today that are Indigenous and non-Indigenous. Some of my school teachers, and like John Hodder said, when I attended the Little Current Public School, I was never treated any different. I was never treated to be a savage. When I moved away for high school, on the other hand, that was a totally different story. I was, for the lack of a better term, I was called a red apple because I looked native, but because I wanted an education, and they had this whole kind of stigma on Indigenous people that I wasn't falling down drunk every day. I wasn't taking care and pushing 3 or 4 babies in a stroller by the time I was 16. Those are the kind of stigmas that were put on Indigenous girls. So moving to the city to get an education and wanting an education for whatever reason they told me that I was acting white. So that's why I was called the red apple. But I never let that bother me, because I was also told that an educated Indigenous person is something that people fear. Because our whole lives we were told that we were less than human, that we were savages, that we were uncivilized. But we're not. We're just the same. And the only thing that we can say that we did wrong was that we were born the wrong color. That's it. We were born the wrong color, and therefore it made us less than human. But I don't believe that. And I'm just grateful for this opportunity to share a little bit of my story and my pain and what my mother went through. And again, I really hope that I've seen it on social media where it's okay, you can put on the orange shirts, you can say that you're with us, that you're allies, because something happened. And I don't want it to just be the story of the week, that 215 children were found. Don't let this end here. Don't let it stop with the 215. We need to keep writing letters to the MPs, writing letters to the higher ups in the governments, so that we can have every school, all the grounds and all the schools across Canada searched and looked for the children that are still out there that didn't make it home. So I ask that we all stay together and that we pray that the 50,000, the 100,000 children that are still missing can be set free and taken home. Miigwech.
Can everyone hear me? Okay, my name's Lorraine Otley. I used to be the Crown Attorney of this jurisdiction, and I noticed that nobody has talked much about the intergenerational effects of residential schools. And I'm not an expert on the area. Probably a lot of First Nations people who are here know more about it than I do. But I thought it was an important issue for people to be aware of. What happens is when children are dragged away from their family and prevented from speaking their language and abused and tortured and mostly not loved for many years, they end up with post-traumatic stress syndrome. Everybody knows what post-traumatic stress syndrome is, do they? It's a disorder where if you suffer from a very traumatic event, you end up with a psychological disorder. So a lot of the residential school survivors ended up with post-traumatic stress disorder. And as a result of not being loved and all of the other psychological problems that were engendered, they ended up not very well equipped to raise their own children. And I don't say that's with all residential school survivors, but with many of them it was true. So they don't have so much of a problem, but their own children end up involved in the courts, and that's where I saw them. They end up with drugs and alcohol problems, and then their children after that, often they don't know how to show love, so the grandchildren end up in the courts. I remember one family in particular in Wakumakan. Grandma went to residential school, and her children were involved with drugs and alcohol and assaults, and their children also were involved with it. Now, criminality is not inheritable, but the results of residential schools are inheritable in my view. And I just thought that people should know, especially non-Native people, that when we talk about residential schools, we're not just talking about a group of very elderly people. The effects go on to generation after generation, and it's one of the great tragedies of residential schools. Thank you.
Ready? Is it okay? Everyone hear me?
Tilt it toward you. Tilt it toward you.
Okay, ready?
Yep.
Hello, Steve Adishnakas. My name's Steve. I'd like to mention two names of survivors of residential schools, Clarence Dagabo and Marjorie Margaret. And they're very important to me because I was married to a woman from Birch Island, and we had some kids. We had two daughters, and Clarence and Marge were my in-laws, my parents, and they're both residential school survivors. And the funny thing is that 35 years ago, we were there. We visited in Birch Island, and nobody ever talked about residential schools. Nobody ever said anything about it. And I remember Dick, like Clarence, he would never talk about anything like that. He would never speak even his language. He wouldn't speak his language, and it was kind of it wasn't talked about. None of the kids, my wife and Teresa and the family, the boys and girls would never talk about it. Anyways, I thought it was important to mention their names because they did survive it. And they did come back, and I'm thankful for that. And now my two daughters don't see their mother because, as the last speaker just talked about, intergenerational trauma, has affected my family, and my daughters don't see their mom, and of course my ex and I broke up, and we didn't know why, but after all this came out, and after we understood it all, we kind of figured out, okay, this is all this is happening. And anyways, my daughters don't see their mom now, and they're traumatized, and my grandkids are traumatized somewhat. So I'm really pissed off with residential schools. I'm really, now I know about it. And one thing I have to say is, what the hell is the RCMP investigating this for? It should be somebody else investigating this crap, because they're the ones who were involved in it in the first place too. So anyways, I'll go back. I'll thank you for listening to me rant and about that and everything, but I thought it was important that I mention the names, and intergeneration trauma is so very out there. So anyways, thank you.
Can you hear me? Yeah? My name is Kim Kishkake. My mom was a residential school survivor. She passed away a couple of years ago. I just wanted to go off of what Lorraine was saying about intergenerational trauma. My mom was taken at an early age to the Spanish residential school, and spent most of her childhood there, and then later on was placed in an all-girls school for her, I guess you'd call it high school in North Bay area. But growing up, my mom, she would tell us about residential school, and much like Lila's mom, she always spoke humbly of the place. She always would say, don't blame them. But at the same time, she also grew up feeling not loved. And she made us know that over and over. Because of that trauma, she was an alcoholic. She depended on a lot of drugs, mostly antidepressants. So most of my life watching her, she couldn't hold a job because of the depression that she felt, especially around the fall time when she'd get taken away from her mom. Every fall she had what was called seasonal affective depression, or whatever you might call it. So every fall she made us aware of how she was feeling and why. But going back to not being able to hold a job and things like that, my siblings and I watched that growing up. And it affected us, her telling us that, she never felt loved. She also would tell us, you don't love me. You don't love me, you don't love me, you don't love me, over and over and over again. And we spent most of our life trying to prove to her how much we loved her. So, my older siblings, I'm the youngest of 5. And I have a different father than my other siblings. There was a lot of drugs and alcohol in the previous relationship with my siblings and their father. And so my siblings maybe didn't get that chance because of all that, growing up in that toxicity, I guess you could call it. They didn't feel that they could have the confidence to go on and get further educated or whatnot. So me coming in 10 years later after the youngest from that relationship, I'm half, I guess you can call it. My mom's Native and my father's non-Native. But for some reason, I don't know what it was or what it took for my mom. But she did start seeking out some of our traditional teachings. And I think that's kind of what guided her in her way. And she went full force with my aunt on our native language. She went to school when she was, I don't know how old, in her 50s, 60s. She went back to school to become a native language teacher. And so she always instilled that in me. One thing I'd like to share with people, or share with you right now, is just something that takes me back. When I'm involved, or if I come across people that are native that are around my mom's generation, or maybe a little bit younger. One thing that people, because I went on to go get educated, I'm a dental hygienist. I work actually just across the road. People will say, "Oh, it's because you're half. It's because you're white. It's because you're white. That's why you got educated." And that hurts. It hurts so much, because in fact, it's not that at all. It's the drive of society's stereotype, I guess, of our people, which motivated me to become different. I wanted to change that. I wanted to change it for my kids. One of them's running around right now. And I wanted to show them that we can change. We can take what we've learned from whatever hurts have come to our families, and we can use that to motivate us, to show that we are human and we can be educated. And that's all I have to say. Thank you.
We could go all night, and I am up for this. I'm also aware that many people are ready for dinner. So, if you would like to go have dinner, feel free. If you would like to stay and keep sharing stories, feel free. And we're going to take at least a little 5-minute interlude to allow everyone to go home or to get refreshments and decide what they want to do. I thank you so much for this sharing, and I affirm that this is not the end. Be sure this is not the end. Keep reaching out to each other, keep working, keep healing.